Well, welcome everybody. We're excited to have you here today. It's a little weird not to be able to see everybody's face, but as Malachi was just saying, we can see we've got a little more than 80 or so attendees, and it looks like we probably will have a few others chiming in. If you're having any technical issues and you can't hear me or anything along those lines, feel free to start to punch into the chat area there, and we can make sure we get a little bit of back and forth going there. But I'm going to dive right in. We've got an hour and a half booked, but feel like we've got content that'll keep us, hot and steady for an hour or so, and then depending on that, we can take questions and have a little bit of a discussion as much as we're able to. So let me pull up this screen and I'll do some introductions. Can everybody see that? Am I working, Malachi? Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to start by doing some introductions. I'm Jason Simon. I'm the CEO of Simpson Scarborough. I want to welcome my colleagues that are going to be sharing the presentation mic as we go through this today. Matt McFadden is our Vice President of Strategy and Accounts. Sarah Wallace, our Director of Marketing and Media Strategy. Malachi is our Director of Marketing and is going to be also just serving as our moderator and doing some follow-up throughout both the webinar, answering some chat questions, as well as we'll be following up after the webinar with some follow-up information. And then Steve App. Steve, we're happy to have you join us. Steve is from Campus Sonar and they've just been a terrific partner of ours over the last several years and is their Director of Business Development. Steve is affectionately their Chief Donut Officer, as I think many of you that know Steve or have met him realize. Elizabeth Johnson is our Chairman, also on the line. And we're excited and happy to have all of you with us. We also have a couple of clients and friends that we've asked to kind of weigh in a couple of places. Sharon Higgins is the AVP of Marketing Communications at Loyola of Maryland, and Aaron Sapinka, I knew I was going to screw that up, is the Associate Director of Digital Engagement for Dartmouth, and we're happy to have both of them join us, and all of you. We can also see that we have a bunch of folks now, up to almost 120 folks that are attending the webinar. Many of you we've worked with and gotten to know over the years, but also some new faces as well. A few logistics as we get going here. We are recording this and we'll send it out to you later, both the recording as well as the slide deck, so that you have those. We'll send it to you this afternoon. So if at any point a meeting comes up, or you need to bounce off, we understand that things are happening really quickly these days. So just know you're not going to miss anything, and we'll be able to fill in for you. We really want this to be as informal as a webinar could be, and really are sort of welcoming a lot of discussion and questions and sharing of really great ideas. That was the intent when we were thinking about this webinar to start with, was we really just wanted folks to have a chance to see some of the really amazing things that are going on. So feel free to, if you have a question, to use the raise hand feature in the chat area, or the participants, if you want to contribute, or if you have a question that you want to ask, we can unmute the lines and you can weigh in there, or just feel free to use the chat and we'll answer as many questions as we can. Neglected to do this the last time we hosted a webinar, so I thought it was important to make sure that everyone knows a little bit about Simpson Scarborough. I wanted to just take a moment and introduce the agency to those of you that may not know us. We like to say that we're an agency that helps higher ed clients build brands that both inspire and endure. We got our start as a market research firm and have worked exclusively with colleges and universities for a very long time now. In the last 5 or 6 years, we've expanded to also offer creative digital, video, and some integrated marketing and media planning as well. And a lot of folks are still learning that about our agency and learning about those new services. So we wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that. Our team is about 50 people. We have our headquarters office in Alexandria, Virginia. We also have offices in Columbus, Ohio, Rochester, Minnesota, and here in Oakland, California. And then we have some folks spread throughout the country. So really love and appreciate and care about this industry deeply, and know this is really difficult times for everybody right now. We work with all kinds of different schools and on all kinds of different projects, from sort of big brand engagements to supporting enrollment or fundraising initiatives, or even real sort of specific and one-off projects, everything from little mini sites or creative campaigns or specific campaigns to, in the case of Butler, helping them develop a live mascot plan over the past year as they transitioned a retiring bulldog out and welcomed a happy puppy into their community. So working on all kinds of those things. So as we get into the meat of what we'd like to share, we wanted to just take a moment to give you a sense of what was forming some ideas that we had, and why we wanted to do this webinar. To begin with, one of the things about our company, for those of you that do know us, is we're road warriors. We have been out on the road speaking at conferences and events and meetings and client campus visits and all of those kinds of things for years and years and years. It's how we built the business, and it was a really important part of forming the community that we all care so much about. And we've started these webinar series because it was a way for us to keep in touch, and also to share some of the great things that we're hearing, and to make sure that we were supporting our friends and colleagues on campuses by helping make connections and share some good ideas. And one of the things that is so unsettling about this pandemic, beyond the immediate impacts that it's having on everyone personally and from a health standpoint, is just the uncertainty. I mean, nobody can really predict what's going to happen a month from now or 6 months from now, or even how lasting some of this change may be. And we still really, really believe that the notion of sharing ideas, building community, challenging kind of conventional thinking is really important, and really important right now. So we really wanted to get a group of folks together to kind of celebrate some of the incredible work that we keep seeing, and that's really what today is all about. There are kind of 4 big things that have gone into at least the ideas that our agency has formed about what the future looks like, and future is a relative term. I think 6 weeks ago we were talking about future being 2 weeks, and then we were talking about it being a month, and now maybe we're talking about it being 3 months, and we might hear some ideas on what things are going to be like over a longer period. But we've been doing sort of 4 things that really kind of formed our ideas. The first of that is we almost immediately began having real in-depth conversations with our clients and learning a lot from what our clients were experiencing. And that the first 2 or 3 weeks, I would say, were really all about issues management and crisis response, and literally getting students off of campus and dealing with that reality of what that was going to be like, and some of those immediate decisions around things like, refunding housing and dining, or deciding what you were going to do with graduation, or any of those immediate things. And then it began to transition to impacts around enrollment, impacts around bringing community together, impacts around fundraising, and some of the other longer term things. But the first piece of informing us was really just, a ton of meetings that we've been having one-on-one with clients. I think Matt and a couple of folks in our office were just comparing Zoom schedules from last week, and seeing who won or lost, depending on your definition of that. And there were several of us that had upwards of 40+ Zoom meetings last week. most of those with clients just talking about what's going on their campus. The second piece of it, and this is why we asked Steve to join us. Right from the very beginning, Campus Owner has just done some really, really amazing analysis of what the conversation is around COVID-19 and how it's impacting higher education, and that provided us a sense of kind of what was going on out in the market and what some immediate thought was. We also, and I'll share a little bit of this, we did our own research findings, and we've been paying attention to a wealth of studies that have been out there in the market analyzing what public perception is like, what perception is like, from university leaders, what it's like for current students and faculty and prospective students, all of those kind of stakeholders. And that has really formed a lot of our thinking and some initial ideas as well. And then the last piece of it, and we'll go over this as well, is just what are the trends right now from a media consumption, media habit standpoint? How are people consuming media? What does that look like? How do we need to think about where we're investing and spending, and both in the near term and in the long term, and how are things changing because of all of this? So the first thing that we'd like to do would be really just to turn it over to Steve. And Steve, I'll let you jump in and share some of those initial findings from some of your briefings.
Yeah, that sounds good. And thanks for having me. And I mean, seriously, to the 130 people that have made time for this webinar today. I'm doing the whole co-parenting / working thing with so many of you. So I know that your time is precious, and I appreciate that so many of you have chosen to give some of your time to us today. I know Jason kind of mentioned us as a Simpson Scarborough partner, but I don't know that everyone knows exactly who we are. So a real quick overview. We are a social listening agency that works exclusively with colleges and universities. Essentially what we do is we find conversations that are taking place online about a topic that someone cares about, or in most cases about an institution. And then we analyze that conversation to help marketers and admissions professionals and alumni professionals better understand their brand, or understand more deeply the audience or campus constituent group they're working with, or maybe a topic, in this case, maybe like coronavirus. And we do that so campuses can work more strategically, or maybe be more agile and responsive to responding to campus constituents, a lot of which don't necessarily tag brands by name here. Now, about a month ago, a little over a month ago now, when this pandemic really started hitting the US, we started, like Jason said, tracking the public online conversation about the coronavirus and higher education, mostly restricted to the United States, although I should point out when we grab Reddit and YouTube mentions, we're not able to specifically limit that to the US. And we're really not looking at conversations that are talking about specific campuses, although obviously mentions of campuses fall into our general queries. Now, a couple notes about all of the data we're about to look at real quick here. We're looking at public online conversations, which means we're not grabbing a lot of content from Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, or any social profiles that are marked as private, but know that there's still a massive data set here. I think at my last check, we're looking at about almost 4 million conversations that we've analyzed as part of this work. So there's a lot of content to look through here. So I think when we look at kind of how this has looked like on a daily basis, we can see pretty quickly here, right? This really took the country by storm here in mid-March. And you can see these massive spikes in conversation. And this was really right when campuses were having to close, as Jason mentioned earlier, get students off campus, make these decisions about how do we move to online learning. A lot of conversation generated, both from campus constituents in the first person, as well as news outlets and the like. And now you can see we've kind of settled into a pattern here, with the caveat that absolutely nothing about this situation is normal. There are some predictable patterns here. We're seeing, for example, that conversation about this topic tends to spike earlier in the week, especially on Monday and Tuesday, starts to gradually drop a little bit and then hits its low point on the weekend, thank goodness for so many of you, and then really ramps back up on Monday and Tuesday, even when there's lower conversation volumes. And I think you can kind of see it here on the daily, but you especially see it here on the weekly view. We've kind of settled into what I think is going to be our new normal in terms of conversation volume. You can see we've had this general decline from March coming into April, but now for the last 2 briefings that we've done, and we do these on a weekly basis, we are starting to see that conversation is starting to level off in terms of volume. Although I should note, and I know you all know this who are working on the front lines here, right? It's still a very elevated volume of conversation, even if it's now a little bit more predictable in terms of how much we might expect. Now, the interesting thing in terms of the conversation taking place that I've been finding and that our team has been finding is where it's actually happening. Now, we're looking at this conversation in a couple different ways. When we look at the sources of conversation, so what are the channels or platforms where this is happening? When we look at the conversation that's really focused on higher education and the coronavirus, we're seeing that generally social networks are really taking up the majority of this conversation. They take up the highest percentage. Actually, Tumblr had a very odd renaissance here in late March that we were kind of curious about, but it fizzled pretty quickly. And we can see here in the darker blue that news has started to take a bigger slice of the pie, as have forums, especially Reddit. But the really interesting thing is when you look at this chart compared to the chart that only looks at conversation being generated by students, enrolled students. And Jason's going to go show us what that discrepancy looks like here. You can see on the left, right, this is all of our conversations. Social's the big player here. But when you look at the conversations that are taking place from students, they are self-identifying themselves as enrolled students. Look at the difference in where these conversations are taking place. Social now takes a real back seat here, and it's forums and Reddit in particular that are really starting to grow, and increasingly so. Even in the last 3 or 4 weeks, we're seeing a larger and larger percentage of conversation from college students taking place on forums like Reddit. And I think this is really important for every practitioner to understand, because when we're thinking about how do we support our different audiences, we need to know that their conversations may be taking place in different spots, depending on what their relationship is with you. And I see that Chris is asking a really great question about undergraduates only. No, this is not undergraduates only. These could be graduate students. These could be med students. We're looking for any kind of information that self-identifies them as a current college student. So if you have a dedicated subreddit for your campus, definitely be paying attention to that, because those are conversations that are happening in an increasing volume, and they're not tagging you in the way that they might on a Facebook page or a Twitter account, because that's not quite possible here. Now, another really interesting thing that we're seeing with our conversation is the negative sentiment. And again, you don't need me to tell you this. You've all experienced this firsthand, unfortunately. Typically, when we look at conversation about a school, about anywhere from 5 to 10% of that conversation is going to be negative. We're seeing here, you can see anywhere from 25 to 50 to sometimes more than 50% of the conversation being negative, which is a real stark difference in why so many of our social media managers are really struggling right now to kind of hold things together. But there is hope here. In the last briefing we do these on a weekly basis. So the briefing that we released last week, we actually saw a negative sentiment decrease for the first time since I think we started these briefings. In particular, we're seeing that drop in negative sentiment from college students. The negative sentiment in our last briefing was about 19 percentage points less negative. So that is really encouraging to me. The other thing that gives us a little bit of hope moving forward here is when we do an emotional analysis of different aspects of conversation related to higher education and the coronavirus. So if we move to the next slide here, we're going to see emotion comparison between students and family and friends. The interesting thing here is that as we've been doing this work, students have been predominantly angry, and family and friends have been predominantly sad. They are grieving for the lost milestones and adjustments that their children or brothers or sisters have had to make in the last month or so, and will continue to make. But again, in the last briefing that we shared, family and friends are actually sharing joyful moments at a percentage that is nearly identical to sadness. So finally, we're starting to see a shift here. And I think this is really encouraging and definitely reflective of the amazing work that so many marketers and communicators have been doing over these last couple weeks. So I want everyone to understand that. I know you're putting in a ton of work. It is paying off. So for those of you who are telling incredible stories about your students, your alumni, your faculty, and your staff who are doing incredible work to help in this pandemic that we're all facing, keep telling those stories. They are starting to resonate as people move past that first initial grief phase. For those of you that are supporting student affairs or admissions teams in terms of doing that personalized individual outreach to your students and their families, I know it's a grind. Keep going at it because it is not going unnoticed by those family and friends who are looking for those moments of comfort and joy within this process that we're all going through. Now, this is something we're in it for a while here. I know Jason mentioned like what the future holds and how long we think about the future. This is something we're going to see through September at least. I know for our research, and I'm happy to address this in the Q&A portion, we're definitely seeing an increase in the focus on the fall semester and the status of fall semester. But for now, I'll just say the work that you're putting in, I know it's hard. It is totally worth it. It's starting to see good results. So definitely know that your work is being noticed by your audiences here. And the last word from me, if you want to see all these previous briefings, like I said, we've been doing these on a weekly basis. If you want to go catch up on previous briefings or subscribe for future ones, we're not going to stop rolling these out anytime soon. You can sign up for those on our website or get in touch with us at any of these social links here. And with that, I'll stick around, of course, for Q&A, but I'll turn it back over to Jason.
All right, great. Thanks, Steve. So the next piece, as I mentioned before, that's kind of just informing some thinking is the research work that's going on out there. And Simpson Scarborough conducted a national study of high school seniors. Those were seniors who were planning to enroll at a traditional four-year school, as well as we surveyed current college freshmen, sophomores, and juniors who were enrolled at a traditional four-year school. We actually just replicated this data. We'll be hosting another webinar, same time next week, next Wednesday at 1 p.m. to go over the replication findings. But there were some things that were really, really interesting, even in the first wave of the data that we felt like were really instructional just in terms of informing strategy. The first was that about 24% of high school seniors indicated that they may change their mind about the college that they want to attend. So the type of institution that they were thinking about attending, or the potential that they may not attend at all. Also, this was a really interesting finding for us. I mean, you know, in almost every study that we've done for years and years and years with prospective students, they always feel like they're getting way too much email, way too much mail, communication in general from colleges and universities. And for one of the first times ever, we were seeing that students, high school seniors, were really feeling like the information that they were getting was not adequate, right? And so some of that is the likelihood to be unable to answer certain questions in that moment of time, but also just the frequency in which they were hearing, or the speed at which they were hearing from institutions was something that we were really emphasizing. And schools, I think, have done a really nice job of kind of trying to immediately fill this gap, moving to a lot of virtual events and other kinds of admitted students things, thinking about those students first. But it's not just your admitted students, it's everyone else that's in the consideration set. You know, it's those juniors that are missing their opportunity to come and visit campus. There's a real hunger right now, and a whole lot of question. And the other thing, as we'll get into in the next point, is people are actually really tuning in right now too. So, you know, that definition of what's adequate and what isn't inadequate is really being influenced by the time that we're in right now. 1 in 5 high school seniors were indicating that they were likely to not attend college next term, which would just be devastating for higher education as a whole. And even, that type of drop at any single institution could be really difficult as well. And then 2 of 3 current students, one of the points that we are always trying to make is, the critical nature of the role and the work that higher education marketing and communications professionals do. And so one thing that we saw was the impact that people's view of the communications they were receiving could have on their long-term opinion of the institution. So 2 of 3 current students that said 2 of 3 current students were saying that their opinion of their school had gotten worse, in part because of the communications that they were receiving. So those students that rated the communications they were receiving as being poor or inadequate, were also saying it had dramatic impact on their overall opinion on that school. So, which obviously can weigh into retention issues, to long-term lifetime value and giving and connection to the institution. All of those things are certainly at risk right now. So these are just 4 findings. We will, if you didn't see that full study, we can make that available to you. And then, as I mentioned before, we're doing a webinar next week with the replication data, because the thing that's interesting from when we were in the field 3 weeks ago, now unemployment claims have more than, at this point quadrupled or even more than that. And so just the impact and the lasting impact on what's going on, we feel like has really, really probably had an impact on how students, both current students and prospective students, are viewing their institution and making some of these decisions. Just a little quick tidbit on one thing that we noticed: huge increase in the number of current college students that felt like the online education that they were receiving was not good, right? Big changes from when we asked that question initially to now where they were 2 or 3 weeks later. So that's the kind of movement that we were expecting and that we're seeing in some of that replication data that we'll share with you next week. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah real quickly to walk us through some media trends. And Sarah, I'll drive for you if you want to jump in.
Okay, great, thank you. So Jason mentioned this early on. It's been really fascinating seeing the evolving media trends over the past 2 months or so, because mostly what we're seeing are that audience behaviors are trending really differently than the way that industries are responding. And that's for a couple of reasons. I think the shockwave of the pandemic is really still rippling across businesses in different ways. And the unpredictability of it is resulting in many industries reducing ad spend or pivoting their marketing funds to other areas of the business. I think that's causing a lot of angst and frustration, both for consumers and for businesses alike. Consumers, on the other hand, are driving up viewership across multiple platforms while searching for things to do and also remain informed of what's happening in their hometowns. So the first stat that we were digging into was just what are consumers doing while they're at home. For Gen Zers in particular, something that has stood out is that there's incredible trust in more broadcast TV and traditional forms of media for information. Group M released a really fascinating trust study about a few weeks ago, and this was done before COVID-19. But it's really relevant when thinking about your communications and how to build connections with people, where people are searching for reliable, authentic information related to the pandemic. Not a huge surprise either that younger generations are spending a lot more time online and on social media to stay connected with friends and family. Although that's created a little bit of a paradox, I think it causes some stress while also maintaining connections with people. Something that's really come out in the forefront of the media research that we've been looking at too is that consumers are really demanding more from the brands that are currently in market. So while there is a lot of opportunity right now in the ad market because costs across a lot of platforms are going down, so businesses that do continue advertising can take advantage of that in other ways, you have to be very careful about what it is we're saying while you are in market. because consumers and audiences, particularly prospective and current students in that age range, are very focused on what brands are doing to support the larger economy and society and the environment today. They're not interested in being sold. They're feeling really overwhelmed. You are starting to see some forms of wear out. People are just exhausted from all of the information, but they still feel like they need to know what's going on. So it's really important to make sure that your communications are authentic to your brand and they are consistent, and you're talking about a larger picture, the student body as a whole, the town that your schools are in, the nation as a whole. And some of the examples that Steve shared as well, like students who are contributing to the greater good, are really great opportunities for earned, owned, and paid content if you're looking to share that out. And again, not a huge surprise, I mentioned this a moment ago, media consumption across the board is up, particularly in digital, but also in traditional forms of media. That means that CPMs and costs are fluctuating. You know, the ad market was down on average almost 11% in the month of March, which is scary when we look at forecasting, but it's also an opportunity. It's really important to keep advertising during these times, because when you go dark, you're losing that connection with prospective students and parents, and those people are really looking for information and they want to feel informed. You know, Jason touched on this in the research a moment ago. On the next slide, you know, Steve touched on this too, some really fascinating fragmentation in the social media market, in particular when you're looking at forums, blogs, and social media platforms in a couple of ways. So the pandemic has forced a lot of companies like Facebook, for example, to expedite platform or product releases. So Facebook released their gaming app a few months early. Snapchat released their Here For You product months ahead of schedule, because they're trying to provide additional platforms. I know someone mentioned a moment ago in the chat something about Discord, and I'm also seeing a huge uptick in conversations driving prospective students in particular to Discord. And what's fascinating about that, when you look at platforms like that and TikTok and Twitch, for example, there are huge increases in communication and conversation among younger audiences in those platforms. And that's for a few reasons. One is because it's activity. You can find like-minded people and you can find something to do. The other side of it is that consumers are, particularly in the age range, are looking to escape a lot of the ads or misinformation that is being posted on other platforms. So that's why you see companies like Facebook breaking off and trying to create Messenger and trying to do the gaming app, because they're trying to cater to these micro communities that students are really forcing upon them, because they're demanding more authenticity, more personalization in smaller groups. For us as businesses, it means a couple of things. It means to make sure when you are out there with owned, paid and earned content, that it's everything that I just mentioned a moment ago. It's really authentic. It speaks to the individuals that you're trying to reach. It's valid information. You know, a lot of the institutions that we've reviewed so far have done a really fantastic job of guiding people to trusted sources like the CDC for information versus trying to create information on their own. So Jason, if you want to put the stats up, this really just reinforces, again, some of what Steve said a moment ago. Huge upticks in engagement on WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, and a couple of considerations. When I mention the phrase engagement, that's really open-ended. It is a bucket of owned engagement. So when you're posting something on your platform, you're getting likes, comments, shares, so on and so forth. But we're also seeing an uptick in ad engagement too. Snapchat in particular has some really creative ad placements. They've seen significant increases in ad engagement throughout the month of March, which is great to see, particularly with that drop in overall ad spend. User engagement is increasing on Twitch and TikTok, so hopefully TikTok will start to open their advertising seats a little bit wider and letting more institutions kind of jump onto that platform. And Steve mentioned this as well, Reddit has seen huge increases. The interesting thing about Reddit is there's a significant amount of conversation happening on Reddit. There is opportunity for institutions to be part of those conversations. If they create a forum for that, it's a great opportunity to hear more from your direct audiences on what's going on. A lot of students are also sharing Discord links within the Reddit forum to kind of drive off that platform. So that's another really interesting fragmentation there. I mentioned a couple of companies pushing out experiences. Quibi is another one. It did launch on time, but I think it experienced a lot of difficulty in its launch because of everything that was going on. But it is an additional user experience that caters toward younger audiences. So it will be interesting to see how that pans out. So what all of this means, we've reiterated this a few times. It's really all about the communications. This is a good opportunity to be really present with a lot of good content, as long as you're careful about the messaging and you take care to consider the platform. Things like content marketing, social media, TV, both streaming and broadcast, are all placements and platforms that are benefiting in some way as a result of this pandemic. Those 4 platforms are really the only 4 that are forecasted to actually go up in terms of overall estimated ad investment for the year because of the pandemic. So a lot of things to consider when looking at advertising and marketing plans, but a lot of really great opportunity as long as it's approached the right way.
Hey, Jason, we can't hear you. I think you muted. That would help. That would help. Thanks, Matt. So we wanted to end this section and really just give you a sense of like what we're seeing this meaning for the higher ed marketing communications professional. And it's been amazing to see the varying hats and roles that we feel like everyone is playing seemingly simultaneously, and all of the various things that you're being asked to do. The first is just the role of finding the voice of the institution, determining who needs to carry that message, who those spokespeople or what that voice needs to sound like in terms of relaying both critical information as well as the brand and the feel of the institution. The second, and this, I think this cannot be overstated in any way, is just the role of like chief curator. There's so much content that needs to meet so many people, so many various kind of stakeholder audiences in the right way at the right time. And that role around content strategy and content curation right now is so critical. There's, information that typically is siloed in our, various institutions really needs to rise to the top. I've been amazed at how much our teams collectively, have all of a sudden turned into live event producers, and our equipment being our iPhones and webcams, and the amazing work that's being done here. And I, can't ever overstate just how much time I recognize goes into doing any of those virtual productions, and all the planning that goes into those kind of things. And then the last piece is just an enrollment marketing expert. It's so funny. I mean, for all these years that we've worked in higher education marketing, it seems like, whether we're talking about whether we're at a small institution that's enrollment driven, or you're at a large institution that, gets more apps than you know what to do with, the relationship between the central marketing communications units and enrollment is never the same and never consistent, except for right now, when everyone needs to focus on enrollment, right? And all of a sudden it's relaying back into all of these various things. And even those places that aren't worried necessarily about filling their classes, they are worried about meeting those constituents, those families, and and kids, with the content that they need to deliver right now. And so all of a sudden, the marketing communications professionals are also the people who are going to deliver the classes. And so that has been, one, overwhelming, but also a little bit welcomed, I think, for many of us that have been, trying to have some direct influence in some of those areas previously, and certainly some really, really great work being done in enrollment marketing right now, and a focus on that's really needed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt, and Matt is going to guide us through some of these really awesome examples that we pulled together.
Great. Thanks. So I think what's been said on this call already, this is a bit of a celebration of this. I mean, I think we've spent the last, 6-7 weeks since that day, like March 10th, March 11th, trying to figure out what's going on. I think one of those days was like in a 2-hour period, like we had the NBA shut down, we had the NCAA cancel the tournament, like Tom Hanks got coronavirus, like Sarah Palin was also like the Masked Singer, and like we didn't know what was happening. I think the next day I just spent like all day on the phone trying to figure out what was happening. I also billed like 6 hours just to Twitter that day, just trying to catch up. And we've really spent the last 6 or 7 weeks curating all of this from higher ed and all these conversations with our clients, and we're just seeing such great work. One of the things that excites me the most is to see the industry change a lot in a really short amount of time, and a lot of that is coming through collaboration that has been forced. I mean, I think we all would admit we wouldn't like to be in the situation we're in and having to do these things, but also the speed at which things are happening, which in our industry, that's not usually the norm. And I think that's probably somewhat exciting. I think there's also some level of it where it's also very tiring too. It's tiring on the agency side as well. We're having to ramp projects really quick, and I'm really proud of our team. But I'm sure you all are super proud of your team. So we wanted to take a couple minutes to celebrate, and we've got Sharon from Loyola and Aaron from Dartmouth to kind of chime in on their stuff. We want to lift them up and let them talk about what they've done, because I think it's best to hear it from the people who are really leading these projects. So we'll show a couple of examples. Jason, if you want to go to the next one, you see William and Mary and Butler and Hamilton in this section. So over on the left, so this is like Jason alluded to it earlier, but and I'm sorry for any other clients that are on the phone right now, but Trip is my absolute favorite client, and one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on. We've done a lot of brand work with Butler, from just the overarching institution brand strategy through all the colleges. And then I got to do one for the mascot program, which was great, writing a brand platform and a narrative for a dog. I can't tell you how fulfilling that actually is. But their team does a great job using him as a messenger for the university. He actually doesn't sit in the athletics department. He actually is in their Marcom department, which is unique. And they use him and the mascots themselves as voices for the university. Part of the actual brand platform, we actually gave him 6 jobs that are within it. Kind of harkening back to the days when I used to watch like Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer, and like, you always have to give a dog a job. Well, we gave Trip and Blue 6. And then, but they do a great job on social, and you should really check them out. It's much bigger than a mascot. And then Catherine Rowe, who's the president of William and Mary, did this phenomenal like reflections of an empty campus video, and they put that together in such a hurry and did such a great job. And it's just her unique voice, and really articulates what William and Mary does so well and what makes it unique. And it's 3.5 minutes, but she just did a great job. And I think it's a great way to draw alumni and current students and parents and other constituencies in. And really kind of be open and honest and empathetic, and just wishing that you had everybody back again. So Jason, you want to go to the next one really quick? So we were hoping to have Melissa Richards on from Hamilton. She's a good friend of ours. They have done a couple really great things in terms of building community and like letting their closest friends and their audiences in. So they actually, we've seen like great examples of virtual tours from around campuses across the country. We'll show another example with Cal Poly, but they actually did a Facebook Live event where they just essentially like virtually let people fly the drone. So you can see on the right, there's a lot of positive sentiment going on, but people were just asking them if they could go like look at whatever building or whatever part of campus during this, and they spent about 18 minutes doing it. It was just such a great example to see people say like, hey, can you take me over here? And then it actually ended with the sunset, which was actually really, really beautiful. But I mean, talk about like social and really positive sentiment and bringing your community back to campus in a really unique way. This was phenomenal, and we think it's totally worth sharing. They're also doing what they call Hamley events. They actually have a band that's going to be live streaming and doing Q&A for their students. They normally have this at what they call the barn. So they were kind of bringing the barn online and have a really cool band, kind of like an indie pop band that's going to be playing here either this week or next week. So they're just, they're really kind of killing it with just how they're bringing the campus experience, you know, to their constituencies. And I think there's a great article in the Chronicle last week, or April 10th, which that maybe that was last week, maybe that was a year and a half ago. I don't know. But yeah, and one of the snippets from it was, you know, the universities and institutions that bring that vibrant campus experience to their people and do it in a great way are going to be the ones that come out ahead. And I thought that that was a really great takeaway. And I think Hamilton's done just a phenomenal job. Again, I wish Melissa was here to talk about that. We can go to the next one, Jason. Okay, so this is Loyola University, Maryland. I'm going to let Sharon chime in here in just a second. We were going to play this for you, but video is pretty unreliable on Zoom, so we'll just let Sharon talk to it. But this is, I think, a great example, and I would encourage you all to go watch it, of bringing the campus community and culture through, but also from a collaboration standpoint. I mean, they had faculty, they had people from their Marcom team, obviously taking B-roll. Your faculty member did the voiceover. So Sharon, I'll turn it over to you. Sharon's the AVP of Marketing and Communications for Loyola University, Maryland. I'll let you kind of talk about the process. I'd love to hear too what you kind of are thinking about next and what your team is looking in terms of what's ahead as well.
Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for having me, and thank you for highlighting this. I really appreciate it. So this came about, I want to say, I mean, I actually talked to some of my colleagues about it. One of my colleagues, when did we do this? Because like you just said, was it last week? Was it last year? It just is all blurring together. But we submitted this, we sent this out in late March, and the inspiration really came from our messages we've received from the president's account. Like most of you, we manage the Vanity President's email account. So we are seeing all of the emails that are coming in. And so we sent out an email to the community that's very empathetic in tone, very spiritual. Our president is a priest. And the responses that were coming in were amazing. They were from alumni, from current students, from faculty, administrators, staff, and just sharing their love for Loyola, their hope for our community. So it inspired our director of university communications to say, hey, we're getting all of these really inspirational, really incredible stories. How can we share them? So she got together with our in-house videographer. We're fortunate to have an in-house videographer. And she wrote a script. I think she's a very talented writer. I think it took her about 5 minutes to write this really amazing script, which you will see if you log on and look at this. And from there, he took all of this B-roll that we had, we threw it together, you know, did some After Effects. And then we thought, well, we need a voiceover. So we did go to voices.com. I don't know if any of you have used voices.com. It's typically pretty helpful, but we weren't getting the right tone. So we have this professor of theology, Dr. Arthur Sutherland, who just has this very distinctive voice. And we called him and said, hey, could you help us out with a voiceover? Do you have any sound equipment? This was kind of funny. Our videographer said, do you have any sound equipment? And he's like, I have an Android. So we said, great, do it. That works. So this voiceover was shot on an Android, given to our videographer. He put it all together, and I can't believe how well it turned out. We received after that even more messages about how just how meaningful this was, because it really, the messages were all about how special our community is, how we'll get through this together, people sharing personal anecdotes. So all of that went into to just creating the script. So in terms of what's next for us, like all of you, you know, we're all working super long hours supporting our friends in enrollment management, trying to stand up some virtual tours or virtual events. We are also just trying to do anything and everything virtually. We are trying to improve all of our websites, knowing that prospective students are probably doing deep dives into websites that they probably didn't really visit before, like deep down into the physics department page. We're trying to update all of those pages just because we know that's what people are looking for, because they can't come visit and talk to all the professors that they need to. So we're doing that. We are really trying to ramp up our social media presence. We're trying to find influencers who can help us send our message out more far and more wide. What else are we doing? Those are the main things. Just day by day, things are changing. Also, in our department, we are dealing with the communications to every constituent, with things they can expect, but also, unfortunately, some of the bad news of, what our university has to do to survive this time, so that then we can thrive on the other end of it. So did I answer all of your questions?
I think that was great. Yes. I love the scrappy nature of how this video came together. So it's really it's great to hear you articulate some of those things. I think for a long time we've been so mired in everything has to be this amazing production quality, and it's good. And the production quality on that video is fantastic. So I don't want to lump that in, but we're seeing other things where the production quality isn't as high and doesn't need to be. It's still drawing a ton of good engagement. So it's cool to hear you say that, but also see that you can produce something that great, being that scrappy. So
thanks.
But so thank you, Sharon, for sharing that. So okay, we're going to talk about Kenyon really quick. So Kenyon College, they actually came to us and, we're looking for a way to host and produce a more customizable virtual event. And again, back to the theme of scrappiness, our team got together, collaborated in just a matter of days to produce, this online faculty forum. The thing I love most about this, there's a couple things. You look over on the right and you see a school like Kenyon, who's in Ohio, but has a really good reputation in terms of smaller private, and you just see the locations where all these prospective students are from. And I think that's just fantastic. I think there's been a lot of good virtual events that we've seen, and I know that you all are continuing to spin more of those up. And those platforms, a lot of those platforms that are out there that are really dedicated to that are doing a great job with it. I know we've heard some struggles as well. This actually worked out really well for us. So I'm really proud of our team for doing this, but we were able to customize this, brand it, put in bumpers as well. And then also just, be able to produce it and stream it. We used Wirecast, in terms of producing it, and then used YouTube Live as kind of our main distribution channel. So the nice thing that came together, I think as it peaked, it had, it was about an hour long. They had, 300 concurrent viewers. They had over 500 playbacks too. So even it's got some longevity. And I know a lot of you all are doing a great job with this and with sharing that content out after the fact. You want to go to the next one? Okay, let's talk about Dartmouth. We're going to let Erin Spinka, who's their Associate Director of Digital Engagement, really speak to this. I think I want to tee her up really quick and then let her be the star of the show, because her and her team, if you haven't followed Erin, on Twitter or another platform, Dartmouth has long done great work, and she's been a great voice in that. I've seen her speak at different conferences, and she's phenomenal when she gets to do that. But I think the one thing that stood out to me about what they were doing was taking, longer form, sometimes very weighty content, and putting it, on a platform, using something like Instagram Stories, and then pinning it as a highlight to break down that content, put it on a channel where their audience was, and also do it in a manner that it just struck such a good tone. You'll see the first one, Jason, if you can go to it really quick, was really all about the announcement. And this is a longer story. I'll let her talk about it. But even just implementing calls to action, making it easy for people to sign up, I thought was a great touch. And then there's another one too that really talks to resources that I think her team did a great job, just taking, a long form piece of content, making it divisible and putting it in a place where their audience was going to be. So Aaron, I'll turn it over to you, and you can kind of clue people in on the process here and maybe some of the results, and also what you're thinking going ahead, what's coming next for you guys.
Yeah, thank you first of all so much for having me. It's nice to talk about the work that we've been doing, even though it's COVID related, in a different lens, because it's just been COVID all the time. This is a fun, different approach to the conversation. For us, pretty quickly, we identified the need to really shift our strategy to social care, which has always been a part of our social strategy. We are a small college with a small community, so it's really, really easy to connect really intimately with our student community and our alumni base and things like that through social. And so whenever we were able to, the social listening and all the different data we looked at earlier, we were able to identify really quickly that our community was, for all sorts of reasons, personal, academic, just kind of like we all were grappling with this sudden change and so uncertain future in different ways. And so we really wanted to focus on things that we knew would kind of help people across the board, no matter where they were in their journey with understanding and coming to terms with what was going on, where they were at in their own journey in regards to going home or figuring out whether or not they were going to come back for an online term or take a term off. And so we just really, really wanted to make sure that we were always providing the information in spaces where, they get this as an email, it's available on a website, but in a place that they can always go very quickly and get the little snapshot nugget of information that they need to move forward. So we would shift we really focused on shifting the messaging from, in an email where it might be a third of the way down, we would reverse that and make sure that the important info, depending on the platform we were sharing. So on Instagram stories, typically current students, we made sure to promote and pull out the content from that longer email or that longer communications message that we knew our audience there would be interested in and highlighting. And honestly, as in the previous slide and in these slides, you can see they're very simply designed. And that was done intentionally because we wanted to make sure that the information stood out from all of the other different content that we had been doing. So, with my team, we've expanded recently. We have someone who does animations. We have Breland Hess, who's my social media manager now, who actually has taken on this virtual wellness project and is continually updating it. And so we have an expanded team, and we had been, expanding our content types and all the different things we were able to do. But when this crisis happened, we needed something that stood out, and honestly paring it down to as simple as possible. One, so that we could do it quickly and get the information out, as soon as possible, but also so that simple design changes, so bolding certain words, emphasizing certain phrases, spacing would pack a bigger punch because it was the only design element on that slide or that piece of content. And so it was really paring back what we were doing to really make it simple, because for me, I have ADHD, and so I really struggle with overstimulation a lot. And so when thinking about this messaging and this content and all of the different things going on in the world, we didn't want to overwhelm our communities with flashiness, with all of this different content that they couldn't absorb or process and possibly miss important information. And so we really wanted to pare it down and focus on what was important. And for us, social care has always been, like I mentioned, a part of our strategy. But I was just talking to Breland today about how I've started to say that it's probably about 85% of our strategy right now, because we are letting our community lead us in what they need and what they're looking for, because this is unprecedented for them, and what we need or what we think they want or what we see other schools doing and doing well and their community is responding to well may not work for us given the situation and the scenarios that our students are going through. And so it's been we've doubled down on the listening, we've doubled down on paying attention to how students are engaging with us, what content they're engaging with us on, and really paying attention to all of the different spaces that we touched on earlier that Steve mentioned, like Reddit and Discord and all of these different platforms that students are having these conversations that might not be showing up in, the Facebook comments or the replies to Twitter. And And so that's been our main approach. And what that's helped us do is really spend time on these virtual wellness resources, which I think for us has been really, really useful, because we're able to promote all the other work that's going on around campus. And like several of the panelists have talked about, one of the silver linings of this whole situation has been how silos have literally started to crumble. There's been people that we've, been trying to, like, not for any other reason than we've been too busy to set up a time to collaborate with our health services office. But now we're going to start rolling out, more regular content that features their services in addition to these wellness resources. And so, all of these doors have been opened up. And so now that, since we're focusing on the things that will take care of our community, we're able to float those to the top. We're able to promote the virtual fitness classes, the studio hour, the digital courses that the studio art department has now transferred to online. And so what's been really fantastic is all of this rich, awesome content that actually sometimes we wouldn't find out about until it had happened, or it was right before it happened. We're getting a heads up because they have to produce it and prepare the event for an online audience, and so they have to promote it themselves and share it. And so we're coming across more stuff at a earlier time, and we're able to reach out, make that connection, start a collaboration with them, and we're just learning so much about our staff and faculty community, as well as what our students use and need on a regular basis, because we are going so focused on very specific things and only adding in certain things as our community is ready for it. So it's been really interesting, and it's been really challenging for me personally to wrap my head around what's the right voice to take in a time like this. And one of the small things that we've been doing is that whenever we're doing private conversations, we switch to using first person and signing off on our name. Again, just reminding people that we're here, that we want to help them, but we're also one person or two people, however many people managing this. And then also just connecting on a human to human basis, saying, like, this is wild, this is weird, I'm here for you. Let's figure this out together. I'm so sorry this is happening. And so, like, just being empathetic and removing the barriers that, previously we may have put up, because we were always just doing so many different things to hit all the different pieces that we talk about regularly. So it's been a really interesting experiment. I highly recommend digging in deeper. We're trying to put together a couple of user generated polls that we're going to collect information from our users, and we're excited to see what they want from us. So we're going to just ask what they want more of, what they want to see less of.
That's awesome, Erin. Thank you so much. It's just great to hear kind of the detail that goes into it, and how you guys are dialing up and dialing down different elements of your content strategy. I think that's important throughout. But it's great for people to hear that. So thank you very much. So we're going to talk really quickly about Drexel, and then we'll give an example for Cal Poly, and then we want to open it up so we've got time for questions. Drexel hits on two things, and we wanted Joe and Craig to join. They're just doing a phenomenal job there. But part of it is about paid media. So this really talks to, Sarah's part earlier in the webinar, and some of their decisions. So obviously, kind of a screen cap that Joe shared on Twitter the other day. This is a pretty solid piece here. Having it show up in the New York Times shouldn't go unnoticed. They did send us some content just for us to share, so we can give you guys a little bit of a look behind the scenes of what they're doing. This one in particular they paused, when the crisis hit, like a lot of people on here, I'm sure, did really kind of paused all their paid campaigns, like right out of the gate, until they could really kind of get their heads around what this was going to be, and they were no different. But eventually they came back to it, and they said, like, actually now, and I think what Sarah's data pointed out was this actually is a good time to advertise. You know, we also know from some Kantar studies, you know, there was only a sentiment of about 8% of people surveyed from Kantar expected brands to stop advertising. So that's really, really low. I mean, people were still looking for this. And I think what Drexel did that was so great was just bringing big brand messages out. You know, they said this is not a campaign that's really aimed at prospective students. This is more just about brand building and brand awareness in general. And they already had a great brand to build on. And so putting this message out was great. And Jason, if you want to go to the next one, we'll kind of show where this lands. They've done a great job on a couple of different, you know, owned digital properties. So you can see some grabs from their Ambition Can't Wait microsite that really pulls this forward. I think a couple of things that they do great here. I mean, one is just the use of video. Obviously, we're getting accustomed now to much more video because of just our current situation. They do a fantastic job with video across, and I think they've got some great resources in order to be able to do that. The other thing that Drexel is doing really, really well is on the enrollment side. Jason, if you want to go to the next one, we'll hit on this. You know, they had to move really quickly like everybody else. And so, you know, their admitted student site is fantastic. You can see the note from Craig over there on the left. And I think more and more folks have started to do this. We have a client out in California who, you know, went from a one-day event to a week-long event. And, you know, we kind of built and supported a microsite to help promote those events as they come on. So they're really having to shift that. Drexel did the same thing with their current students. Just pulling and pooling all the resources. To Aaron's point, you know, they're now having to collaborate with people across campus. Seeing faculty get involved on some of these videos, and the colleges and departments produce video as well, has been great. And that's typically things that you didn't necessarily see on like an admitted student site, or, you know, really perspective heavy, where you now have all this content from across campus because they can't get there. Like they can't interact with faculty. You know, from our survey, we saw, you know, there was multitudes of responses, you know, that were over 50, 60% of people that wanted live chat with faculty. They wanted live chat with current students, you know, across the board. And we're starting to see more and more universities do that. And then lastly, before we kind of turn it over, is these are actually our friends at Cal Poly. So we embarked on about a 1.5 year long research, branding, and creative project with Cal Poly. And that culminated in a new visual identity. You see like some little elements of it within here, you know, for the institution, a new brand, you know, a new creative campaign, and a new website, which we call the Gateway, affectionately called the Gateway with the folks at Cal Poly. You know, the homepage and then the major landing pages were all redesigned, pattern libraries, everything. Now that they have that, they're actually putting that to good use. We were on a call with them because we're actually going to be doing some pulse surveys with them to index against our national survey. And they were talking about how nice the Gateway is now because it's so easy for them to spin up this content. And they've done a great job with virtual information sessions. Their digital swag too. It's kind of fun to see the brand flex in a really fun way. And then down at the bottom left, I would encourage you guys to go look at this too, because it's great. They brought their student ambassadors, their tour guides, sent them around campus individually with iPhones and just kind of let them give a tour together, and then pulled it all together into one 17 or 18 minute long video. That was really, really well done. Again, it was really scrappy, but the production quality was great. They were able to show and talk about elements of the brand, which is a great thing to hear them articulate those things that are really important to them, but also see the diversity that is at Cal Poly, which is great, and where all these students were from. So I'd encourage you to go look at Cal Poly stuff. Their team really, really did some phenomenal work over the last month. So I'll kind of end there, but thank you guys for everybody that contributed, and then everybody in the higher ed community that's on this. Thank you guys so much for everything that you're doing, and it's just really exciting to see, and we'll continue to celebrate it.
So we have some time for some questions and some discussion. I'd encourage you, if you have anything that you want to ask, or even anything that you want to share with any other attendees, that you use either the chat or the Q&A tabs. One question that I know that I saw earlier on was related to kind of what we're seeing around advancement and what kind of activity we're seeing there. I think there's been some really interesting things that we've observed, whether it's just from basic engagement with alums and donors, or some really coordinated efforts. So one example that comes immediately to mind, and I think that in part this is because we have several folks on our team that are graduates from the University of Richmond, but we saw some really great activity that they have done in engaging their alums in particular. One thing that they did was they actually sent an email and a survey to their alums asking how they would like to be engaged right now, given all of the COVID-19 issue. And so it was a place of being helpful, right? Going back to even some of those things that Aaron said around social care. It wasn't first starting to ask them to give or to anything, but it was, what are the ways in which you would like to take part and to hear from the university right now, including, offering some suggestions like, would you like to connect with a current college senior, right, that would be graduating this spring in order to help that person navigate what's going to definitely be a difficult career path, especially right now. And then along with that, they sort of, once you were in that flow, once you're in that cycle and they're in their CRM patterns there, they were providing those people with some digital swag, some things similar to like the things that we saw that Cal Poly was doing with their admitted students, and really just doing those direct connections and some of that direct opportunity. I think that some of the brand building activity, obviously, like even the things, even the video, the great video that we shared from Loyola, I mean, that was intended to bring an entire community together. And so thinking about from an alumni and development standpoint, the importance of, that kind of storytelling, that kind of community building, that's a critical piece of that. And then there've been a lot of, I think, direct activities of varying levels. So, we've seen campuses directly doing a sort of emergency student funds with varying levels of success and engagement. I know that for me personally, I went to North Carolina State, and they had some direct ask there of alums and donors for their student emergency fund. They raised more than $1 million in 3 weeks. They were doing virtual board meetings. So I'm on one of the boards, and they were doing virtual board meetings. And instead of talking about typical development activity, they really just talked about the student emergency fund and asked all of those board members that were on that call to give directly to that right during the meetings, during the Zoom meetings, and talked about the importance of that. So some real direct kind of activity and focused development activity are some things that we that at least personally I've observed. And then I have to say that I've been really pleasantly surprised by the schools that have continued on their path with their giving days. Some really amazing participation in some of those activities that especially like early on. I think I saw that UC Berkeley early on, within the first week or two of everything sort of happening and going down those early parts of March, they plowed ahead with their giving day and they had a huge success. I think I saw over the weekend that UC Davis just closed out a giving day, more than $2 million, I think higher than their total any other year that they had done it. And so I've seen schools, continue on with giving days and those kind of things at varying levels of success. So I don't know if any other folks on the panel want to jump in there with any reactions to other kind of alumni and development things that they've seen. Or Sharon or Aaron, if you all are doing anything on your campus specifically.
We are actually doing, like all campuses, we have an emergency relief fund, but we started that. It was fairly successful. I wouldn't say it was certainly not as successful as sort of the NC States, but we were focused on helping, the message was we're helping students get emergency relief for things like technology, travel, all of that. So the immediate needs that they had, and we're now shifting that messaging because our emergency need right now is financial aid for students to come back to school, to start school. So we're shifting that messaging. And we are creating a sort of a micro campaign from now until June 1st, which is, only 6 weeks, but we have a series of probably 3 to 4 small messages, starting with a message from the president and ending with what hope. We haven't produced it yet, but we are also doing this in-house, some hopefully sort of a heart-tugging, emotional appeal on video. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, great. There's Aaron, anything, or Matt, anything anyone wanted to add there? Sarah?
You hit on most things that we're talking about. We have one client right now where part of the big strategy is going to be the Giving Day and how we're going to message that out versus how we think about like more direct solicitations and those different audience groups. So I'm glad that those are continuing on. I know I was encouraged because I saw Ashley Budd, and if you guys don't follow her, she's great. She's a friend of ours. She runs, amongst many things, one of the best Give Day programs in the country. And hers was actually on March 10th or 11th or 12th. I mean, it was right in the midst of it all. And they continued to do it. And I think it's really important.
Yeah. There's a great question here, and I actually would turn to some of our campus folks that are on the call to answer this. But a question here in the Q&A: did leadership for the examples shown flow through typical hierarchical models, or did any of the schools end up with new ad hoc teams of people who had digital content or messaging to contribute? Does the same team plan to come? Does the same team plan the official presidential emails and the visual and social content, or are they different teams? So I think just this notion, that both of you kind of talked about, of needing to be nimble and kind of pulling people together, almost like you would do in crisis and issues management response. Was there a team that kind of that you've assembled to deal with these things, or are you working through your typical channels?
For us, it's been mostly the typical channels. I'll say the foundation is the same, but there's been additional players collaborating more with Student Life and people from the registrar. So folks that maybe weren't always looped in, or because we didn't have, feedback needed on a slide or an Instagram post or something from them. Usually they're newer to the process, but generally the foundational process is still the same. And we manage the presidential communications as well. So it's prepared as a package, sort of, where I get the content and can start working on producing it for social.
The same is true for us, pretty much foundational, but we have, similar to any crisis, we have stood up our emergency operations team, and that includes a policy group. So the policy group, we meet regularly, and they are definitely, and the policy group is who you'd expect: the president, the vice presidents, maybe certain key leaders in different areas, and they are definitely taking a more active role in what types of communication we're sending out. So it's sort of, we're operating in crisis mode.
That's great. I think one of the things that we've observed, especially with the schools that we're really engaging with a lot right now, is that the silos have been broken down. And I think that's more out of a need for speed than out of, the typical desire, which would, have us meet with one group and then build stakeholder buy-in from another group and kind of let that sort of daisy chain in. Our experience kind of right now, especially in things that are requiring some fast turnaround or quick decision-making, is to bring all of those people all together as quickly as possible, make decisions, get everyone aligned around what is the intent of what we're doing, and really work in much more of an iterative fashion, as opposed to a lengthy process that builds a traditional kind of campus buy-in. We had one new campus engagement that we literally were pulled in. We outlined on a Monday what the objectives were in launching a site for admitted students. We launched that site by Friday, And then the following Monday, we turned and pulled the same group of people together to begin to plan long-term giving things. So, which none of those things would have been, that would not have been our typical way of working. So, and certainly our clients. So that's one of those places that, is maybe that kind of pace sticks around for a little bit, and we get out of the, the way that we are used to working in higher ed. Let's see, there's another question. Malachi, I would welcome you to kind of jump in here and make sure there's nothing that I missed, but I see another question around maybe just taking a few minutes to talk about grad and transfer. I'm assuming this question is particularly around enrollment. I think for transfer enrollment, especially at the undergraduate level, we're seeing a lot of schools have focused areas or focused, events, virtual events, and really trying to do focused communications specifically to transfers, and also letting down some of the barrier around requirements and the typical flow around, what those things would be as a part of the admissions process. So transfer still remains high, especially a high priority, especially for a lot of the public regionals that we're working with, that typically have a lot of transfer students. So I see that being still remaining a big part of the enrollment process, the undergraduate enrollment process, and a lot of kind of specific things being pushed towards them. I haven't seen a whole lot of activity around graduate enrollment and specifically around that changing. And I think that's for a few different reasons. One, I think everyone is really unclear or uncertain on if we're going to see the typical bumps that you would see in a decline or in the economy, when we go into a recession or the economy's bad. What historically we've always seen is that there then are big increases in graduate, continuing, professional enrollment. It's really, really unclear on if that's going to continue to be the case or not. One, because I think everyone almost is trying to understand if there is going to be like this immediate light switch where things just go back to normal or not, and those people don't return to school like they would typically do in a more lengthy recession. And then the reality around kind of spinning up more immediate classes and programs that could benefit sort of people in the short term while they've been captive in their homes. I think we've seen very, very few examples, if any, of some immediate programs that have launched in light of this. I might actually, Elizabeth, will you remind me? There was one school that we saw that spun up an immediate program. I'm trying to remember what school that was and who it was.
It was Oberlin. Oberlin.
Oberlin, and what was it?
It was a program like a liberal arts perspective on the COVID pandemic. And they offered it free to all of their admitted students. I think you could pay to take it, but they offered it free to all of their admits.
Yeah, so that actually, I mean, it does point back to one of the findings that we saw even in our research that we mentioned before with prospective undergraduates. One of the things that they indicated was a place that they would like to have some experience was in what it would be like to take some of these online classes, literally like zooming into those classes or having that experience. And I certainly think that whole notion is relevant for graduate enrollment too. What kinds of things could you do that would be immediate sort of teasers for those kinds of programs, and give these folks that are stuck at home right now, craving some element of social community, give them an opportunity to experience what those classes are like, or even just have an abbreviated version of that. I think those are great opportunities, but they require a lot of academic decisions.
Some schools are doing this for current students as well. I mean, I've got my son lined up to take one. He's a double major in public policy and mathematics at Franklin and Marshall, and he's taken a course this summer on health policy related to, all thrown together very quickly and based on what we're going through now.
Malachi, were there any other questions that you saw in here? Anything you wanted to bring up? Well, we know time is precious right now. and we appreciate all of the time that you all have given us. There's a little bit of housekeeping here at the end, and I'll turn it over to Malachi to take care of that. We will give you the whole deck. The deck will have links to all of the things that we shared within it, and there's some other resources that we'll follow up with as well. Malachi, if you want to kind of give us a little wrap up here. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. So like Jason said, we'll send out the recording later this afternoon. Most of you have seen our national student survey, and like Jason referenced, we just got out of the field with a replication. You're going to be sent that automatically next week when we publish it. But we also invite you to a webinar where Elizabeth walks us through those findings. Same place and time next week, Wednesday at 1 Eastern. And a sign up will be in the email there. And then on the topic of the survey, one of the things that we've done is, we believe strongly that everyone should replicate it for their own institution. One of the things we're doing to help support that is we're going to give our survey instruments to anyone who asks for it. There's no strings attached. If you use Qualtrics, we'll actually give you the QSF files to save you time on programming. And in that same spirit, we're also giving away virtual office hours every week. So there's going to be a link in the follow-up email, but let us know what you're struggling with, what you need, just some outside collaboration on, and we'll pair you up with a senior member of our team for just a free whiteboarding session. There's no strings attached. Again, we think it's a time for all of us to be generous with our resources. And so that's what we want to do. And then lastly, we really value your feedback. So we want to continue to host these informal webinars just to be a resource to you guys. But we also want to know what's going to be most valuable to you. So just take a moment to fill out that survey when you get it. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining us today. We'll let you get back to your other Zoom meetings, and hope to be in touch soon.
Thank you all. Thanks to all of our panelists too, Sharon, Aaron, Steve. Appreciate you all attending today.
Miss you guys.
Thanks for having
Hope
me.
to see you soon.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.